And hello YouTube, GSmaniamsmart here, and in today's video we're going to be taking a look at Ascended Gear versus Exotic Gear, why you should be getting Ascended Gear, when you should be getting it, and how much of a difference there really is between the two gear sets so you can make that decision. That's coming up next. What's up guys, GSmaniamsmart here. Today we're on another brand new video for Gaming with GS, and welcome back to another video. Glad to have you as usual. If you happen to be new to the channel, new to any of my videos, I want to welcome you as well, and I encourage you to hit that subscribe button. Plenty of other Guild Wars 2 content videos on this channel. We do gold guides, PvE guides, PvP guides, build guides, gameplay guides, patch summaries, story recaps, all kinds of cool stuff on here. So if you're interested in Guild Wars 2, interested in gaming, I encourage you to hit that subscribe button as well as that post notification bell so you can stay up to date with all the most recent videos. So one of the video topics that I've wanted to talk about for quite some time now is Ascended Gear versus Exotic Gear. Not only has this been a huge topic throughout my entire time playing Guild Wars 2, but many people on the channel, many viewers in the comments section always seem to ask this question, and it continues to be something that as you create a new character, as you level up, even if you're a new player, you question yourself, should I be making Ascended Gear? Should this be a goal that I want to go for? And how much of a difference is there really between Exotic Gear and Ascended Gear? And today, I want to take a look at that and sort of do a quick little analysis of what the pros and cons are of the two different gears, as well as do a DPS check with Berserker's gear, so you can sort of see how much of a difference a Ascended Berserker gear set makes from a Exotic Berserker gear set. Now be aware, we are going to be using only the Ascended Armor and the Ascended Weapon. I do not have the Ascended Trinkets equipped, so when we do our round of Ascended Gear DPS check, and when we do our round of Exotic Gear DPS check, we will not have Ascended Trinkets or Exotic Trinkets included. The main reason why is because it already costed me 55 gold to buy a full set of Exotic Berserker Gear and Weapon, and I didn't want to waste any more money on the Trinkets. And the other thing is because just by looking at the stats, Ascended Trinkets are way better than Exotic Trinkets, so there's no point to even compare those two, because very blatantly you'll see just by looking at the numbers that Exotic Trinkets are inferior to Ascended Trinkets. So if you're questioning Trinkets, don't bother questioning, because the answer is yes, Ascended Trinkets are well worth your time. In fact, Ascended Trinkets are really easy to get as well. Most of the time, all you need is laurels, guild commendations, ectoplasm, some gold maybe, and there are even some very easy backpacks you can get as well. So that's a little disclaimer there. We will not be taking into account Ascended Trinkets. However, if you do want to see a guide on how to get your easy Ascended Trinkets, I do have a video on that, and I'll leave a card on screen right now, as well as a link in the description. The other thing I want to mention as well for this video, we are using my PvE Elementalist power build. It's the same build that I shared about a year ago, a little over a year ago, 412 days to be exact, because I just checked the video a few minutes ago. I do have a video on that still if you want to check the DPS build out. I'll leave a link on screen right now as a card, and it's also in the description. So if you'd like to take this DPS build for your Ellie, then you can go ahead and copy that build. So first of all, let's go ahead and check the damage for our Ascended Gear. Now in the background, you will see some footage. I'll go ahead and let it play for you. Probably have a short clip of music. I've tried my best to keep my rotations as consistent and perfect as possible, but as usual, there'll probably be a few people who will be criticizing the rotation. So first up, Ascended Gear with an Ascended Staff. Here's the DPS check for that. So after you just saw the rotation here, all the numbers on the bottom left corner of the screen where the chat box is, I averaged them out, and basically the average total that we got for Ascended Gear is 15,994.6 damage per second, which means that every second you are doing very close to 16,000 damage with Ascended Gear. Now this is obviously with all the buffs included, and it's actually fairly close to what we would be hitting if we had the Ascended Trinkets. So if you don't have all the buffs, which is sometimes kind of unrealistic, but you should be hitting around or close to 16,000 damage, maybe 15,500 if you only have a few of the buffs. That's how much Ascended Gear is going to give you as far as DPS goes. Now let's go ahead and check out Exotic Gear and how much damage Exotic Gear will give you. Here's a DPS check for that. So basically, same rotation, same type of style. I fought the Golem here. Same Golem, same buffs, same food, same utility. The traits are all the same. Everything's the same. However, our DPS is 15,151.6 DPS, which means a difference between those two will be 843 damage per second, which means that your Ascended Gear is giving you 800 extra damage every second compared to your Exotic Gear. Now this is just mind-blowing to me, because if you remember, about maybe a week or two ago, we did a video on how effective food and utility is in Guild Wars 2, and food and utility had more of an effect than this Ascended Gear does. Food and utility could easily give you 1,000 extra damage per second if you had your food and utility compared to if you did not have your food and utility. If you want to check that video out, I'll leave a card on screen right now. Link is also in the description if you haven't seen that, so you can learn about food and utility. However, it's crazy to me that Ascended Gear, which takes so long to craft, is basically underperforming food and utility. That's pretty shocking. So as far as DPS goes, if you're sitting here wondering, well, should I get Ascended Gear? Should I get Exotic Gear? As far as DPS goes, there isn't that huge of a difference. In fact, it's not even a 10% difference. It's 843 damage per second. Now, like I said, your Ascended Trinkets are well worth it, so definitely get those. But when you're thinking about getting Ascended Gear, it's a choice that you have to make yourself. Is 143 DPS important to you? Do you feel like it makes a big difference? Then go ahead and go for it. Now, one of the big questions that when we did this DPS check and we look at the averages here, one of the big questions that comes up is, well, why is it such of a insignificant difference? And you might think it's insignificant, and it can be significant. I'll go over that in a little bit. But why isn't it doing more damage? And if you take a look at Ascended Gear, the difference in stats is very small. You might get 3 or 4 extra points in power for Berserker Gear than you would in an Exotic compared to an Ascended. And that's why we're not getting a lot of difference in damage here. So this is pretty crazy to me. I thought that Ascended Gear would at least get like maybe 1,000 extra DPS, but it seems like it's not. So I'm glad that I put my 55 gold before I made the video here into the trading post just to give you guys information. Now the question is, well, if it's only 843 DPS, so why bother getting it? Does it really make a huge of a difference? And the argument can be said that, well, if food makes a difference over time, then Ascended Gear will make a difference over time too. As I said in my food video, over time, if you're doing a dungeon, if you're doing a raid, if you're doing a fractal, that damage can be boosted up to 1,000,000 extra DPS over the course of 15 minutes. So it's not to say that Ascended Gear is worthless. It's not to say that Ascended Gear isn't worth crafting or that it's useless. in certain situations, it is very useful, because if you're doing a raid, or if you're doing a fractal, or if you're doing anything that requires you continuously be in combat, you're able to do a ton more extra damage over the course of time. And in certain situations like raiding, that is very important. So if you feel like you need that extra DPS, in fact, with my calculations here, you could be doing an extra 765,000 damage per second if you have your ascended gear compared to your exotic gear over the course of 15 minutes. Now, when you look at a number like that, then yes, it does seem like it makes a big difference. But most of the time in PvE content, you're not in a dungeon, you might not be in a fractal, you might not be in a raid, you're not continuously fighting. So for regular PvE content, if you're someone that just does World vs. World, or if you're someone that just does PvP, or just does, regular PvE content, maybe do the occasional dungeon or the occasional fractal, but not a lot of your time goes into fractals or raids or dungeons, well then, Ascended Gear really isn't that much worth it, because while you're doing 843 extra damage per second, over the course of time, that won't really accumulate to be a huge number. So it really depends on what type of gameplay or what type of game style you're going for in Guild Wars 2. But like I said in my food video, food is something that isn't mandatory. People have killed raids without food and utility. People have killed raids with blues and greens armor, with yellow armor, with exotic armor. So that's not to say that even if you're doing raids or fractals, Ascended Gear is required, because it's not. You can still kill raid bosses, you can still kill fractals, very doably, without Ascended Gear. So, getting Ascended Gear is really, it comes down to a preference, and it's optional really. Do you want to go for that extra milestone, for that extra goal to get the Ascended Gear and basically go for optimal damage and optimal stats, the max stats as high as possible, then yes, go for Ascended Gear. But if you're not willing to put that time and effort in, or if you're not willing to put that amount of gold in, and it does cost a ton of gold, then don't feel bad for it, because it doesn't make that huge of a difference. Having a full set of exotic gear and ascended trinkets, that's just fine. I know some people are very hard in the fact saying that ascended gear makes a big difference, and if you don't get it, you can't do raids, but that's not really true. You can do raids, you can do every piece of content in the game without ascended gear, and every piece of content in the game is doable without it. So then the question becomes, when do you really need Ascended Gear? If Ascended Gear isn't required for damage, then why would anybody want to buy it for any other reason? The main reason why Ascended Gear is useful, and this is probably the biggest reason why anybody, and why including myself, I bought Ascended Gear, and a lot of people buy Ascended Gear. Mainly, it's for fractals. If you're doing high-scale fractals, you're going to need Agony Resistance. And the only way you can get Agony Resistance is with Agony Infusions. And the only way you can use Agony Infusions is with Ascended Gear, because Agony Infusions can only be slotted into Ascended Gear. If you have a full set of exotic gear, there is no Agony slot. You cannot include an Agony Infusion in your exotic gear. There's no slot for it. So if you plan on doing high-level fractals that require a good amount of Agony Resistance, that require more than 15 or 20 Agony Resistance, because 15 or 20 Agony Resistance you can get from a tier of Alba, and you can get from the singularities in the fractals. But if you want to do a fractal that has, required 40 Agony Resistance, 50 Agony Resistance, then you're going to need to get Ascended Gear. Now, yes, you can get to a pretty high amount in Agony Resistance just based off of your Ascended Trinkets. Your Ascended Trinkets do have Agony Infusions in them, and if you infuse them, you still can get to a pretty high amount in Agony Resistance. So even for fractals, to a certain extent, Ascended Gear isn't required either. But if you want to do those high scales, like 75, 80, 90, 100 scale fractals, that is the only place you would really need to get Ascended Gear and an Ascended Weapon, because then you'll be able to take advantage of all the infusion slots in all of your pieces of gear. So the only real reason why you would want to buy Ascended Gear is if you're doing fractals, if you want to go for that milestone or for that goal, or if you want to be more competent in raids and actually produce the max amount of DPS that you can provide for your raid, or if you're someone that likes to see, big numbers and max out your character and go for completion, then that would be a reason to go for Ascended Gear. But if you take a look at the value of Ascended Gear and how much damage you're getting out of it, and how much you're getting out of the gear, if you think about it, this set of exotic gear and weapon costed me 55 gold, with sigils and runes included. Now the sigil and the runes costed a fairly good amount, probably a fourth of the cost. So if you buy the entire set like I did, it will cost you around 55 gold. The Ascended gear, an Ascended set, costs you nearly 10 times that amount. I think it ranges somewhere between 400 to 450 gold. A full set of Ascended gear and an Ascended weapon, and then all your runes and sigils as well. That's how much it costs. Now that's close to 10 times the amount of a full set of Berserker exotic. Now think about this though, the only reason why this exotic gear is so expensive is because Berserker gear. A lot of the other stat types are a lot cheaper. So sometimes you'll even be paying a lot more for the Ascended gear than you would for the exotic gear. Some exotic stat types are very cheap. So since the cost for Ascended gear is 10 times the amount of the exotic gear, let's just round it that way, maybe it's 9 times the amount, is the value you're getting from it 9 times the power of the exotic gear? No. You're not doing 9 times or 10 times the amount of damage that exotic gear does. You're not, your character doesn't improve in stats 9 times or 10 times the amount that it does with exotic gear. So if you're thinking about it mathematically and how much time and effort you put into it, then yes, it is a pretty big investment for not a lot of extra stats, which is one of the main arguments why sometimes getting Ascended gear isn't really necessary. But like I said earlier, Ascended gear is completely optional, and if you want to set yourself another goal, go for completion, have max stats, then Ascended gear is definitely an option. So before I made this video, I always thought that Ascended gear had much more of a difference. I mean, a lot of times in forums and on Reddit and in the game, you'll see a lot of people say, oh, it doesn't make that big of a difference, it's only a small difference in damage. But how much is a small difference in damage? How much is that? And I'm glad I did the video today because now I see that it's really only per second, it's 843 damage. That's how much it is in difference. Personally, I love Ascended gear though. I think, I like maxing my stats. I like having the best gear. I like going for extra goals and milestones, and I like doing high skill fractals. So if you're a person like me, then you're gonna need to make Ascended gear. But hopefully this is giving you some insight. Hopefully it's giving you a nice little breakdown of how much Ascended gear is worth and how much it can actually give you in return once you've created it. And if you like this video, go ahead and leave a like. If you have any questions, comments, want to talk about anything, discuss Ascended gear versus exotic gear, give your own opinions about the gear sets, go ahead and leave a comment down below. Would love to hear your thoughts about this. Like I said, if you haven't subscribed, go ahead and subscribe to the channel. Plenty of other helpful stuff on the channel. And if you want to check out my most recent video, go ahead and click the annotation right here. You want to check out a similar video to this one, click the annotation here. You want to check my tutorials channel, the vlogging channel, or my other channel, click the annotation here. And if you want to donate $1 to my Patreon page, you can do so by clicking the annotation here. That's pretty much it, guys. Thank you for watching. As always, this is GSmaniamsmart, and I'll be back soon. You think? Don't go anywhere.